Welcome to the 700 Club. Vladimir Putin has a chokehold on much of the world's supply of wheat. Ukraine is trying to ship much-needed grain out of its Black Sea port. Yet just one day after signing an agreement to let that happen, Russia fired missiles at the port.
Now, concern is mounting that millions of tons of grain will remain stuck in silos while people around the world suffer hunger. Dale Hurd reports.
The U.S. is accusing Vladimir Putin of using food as a weapon after his forces attacked a key port used to get desperately needed grain to the world. There was worldwide condemnation of the Russian missile strikes on the Black Sea port of Odessa, just one day after Russia signed a UN-brokered agreement to allow grain ships to begin leaving. Firefighters battled the flames, dousing ships with water. Russia first denied it hit the port, then admitted it did, claiming it hit military targets. This Ukrainian parliament member says responsibility for getting Ukrainian grain to the world now rests with Vladimir Putin.
Are they really willing to blockade the Ukrainian seaports to let us, Ukraine, export more than 20 million tons of grain?
The attacks not only cast doubt on the agreement between Russia and Ukraine, but further threaten grain exports and global food supply at a time when the world needs Ukrainian wheat. Ukraine produces enough grain yearly to feed 400 million people, but last year's harvest is stuck in silos, and there are fears that if it's not shipped out soon, this year's crop will be ruined because there's no place to store it. U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine Bridget Brink in a tweet called the Russian attack outrageous and said the Kremlin continues to weaponize food. The UN says over 800 million people were affected by hunger in some way last year. And David Beasley of the World Food Program says this year an estimated 285 million people face starvation.
But we're facing an unprecedented crisis right now. And if we don't deal with it strategically, effectively, and timely, you're going to have mass famine, you're going to have destabilization of dozens of nations, and you're going to have mass migration. This is not hyperbole, this is reality.
In East Africa, millions of lives are at risk. CBN's Ephraim Graham traveled to the region to see World Vision aid distributed to needy people.
I've never seen people in such dire and desperate straits, to literally have not eaten for days, to be reliant upon a food distribution to get food. But at the same time, those people who received are greeted by people who didn't receive. And they then cook and not only feed their families, but share.
CBN's Operation Blessing is providing food for those in need as a deadly drought is taking its toll in Kenya, with families facing starvation because their crops and livestock are dying. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Well, thanks to CBN partners for making it possible to distribute that food. But we all need to be concerned about what's happening in Ukraine today. If that grain is not shipped, yes, it's not hyperbole. We're talking about starvation. We're talking about mass migrations. We're talking about governments being overthrown because there's not enough food to feed people. This war in Ukraine has to stop, and it has to stop now. In other news, extreme heat continues to roast nearly 100 million Americans. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That's right. Thanks, Gordon. It could be the longest heat wave for the Northeast in a decade. New Jersey seeing 5 straight days of 100-degree weather. Boston hitting a record high of 100 degrees on Sunday, the hottest since 1933. In New York, the annual triathlon scaled down to just half the distance out of concerns for safety. The city also setting up 500 cooling centers for people who don't have air conditioning. So far, at least 5 people have died from heat-related causes. Some 90 million Americans from Texas to Maine are still feeling dangerously hot temperatures, and there's no let-up in sight. It's expected to last through the rest of the week. Well, President Biden's health is improving several days after testing positive for COVID. The White House releasing a statement from the president's doctor saying his oxygen levels are excellent and there's no fluid in his lungs, but he does still have a sore throat. Also, his cough and body aches are less severe. The White House says the president has the BA.5 strain of COVID, which accounts for 80% of all new cases in the United States. He's been taking Paxlovid, an oral antiviral treatment developed by Pfizer. After 5 days in isolation, he'll be tested again and could return to work as early as this Wednesday. Well, now that Roe v. Wade is no longer the law of the land, the hope is that children who would have been aborted will now have a chance at life. But who will support them? Christian foster care and adoption agencies are challenging the church to answer this call. Caitlin Burke reports.
Nearly a year ago, when Texas enacted the most restrictive abortion law in the country, there was a significant increase of women considering adoption.
It probably started about 45 days after the Texas heartbeat bill went into effect. A lot of the women who were calling us just had questions about adoption.
Sherry Statler, head of Christian Homes and Family Services in Tyler, Texas, says it's happening again with the Roe versus Wade decision.
It's been a very busy week. We're just thrilled that they call us, and we're happy to help them sort out their options related to the pregnancy, but also help them deal with lots of other crises that they have going on in their lives.
The Supreme Court's action also triggered anti-abortion legislation in nearly half the country. Now, both critics and supporters of the pro-life movement are calling for renewed focus on life beyond birth.
Now it's time, with the potential demand for supporting families or women or teenagers who are facing unplanned pregnancies, helping more children who get placed in the foster care, whatever that looks like, we have to be ready to do more.
Michelle Douglas is the program director for The Call, a nonprofit in Arkansas mobilizing local churches to serve children and youth placed in foster care. She says the Bible is clear on the role of the church.
Undefiled religion is this, to care for orphans and widows in their distress. And so we're really good at the widow, the traditional widow and the traditional orphan. But the modern day orphan is the child in foster care. And the modern day widow is often their mother who's doing it alone.
While post-Roe children will be adopted into loving families, more will likely also be born into households strained by addiction, poverty, and mental illness. Without support, those kids could end up going into an already strained foster care system.
What we've tried to do for years is help people see the urgency. And so I think maybe this has kind of heightened senses and kind of helped people to realize, hey, there are 400,000 kids in the foster care system today. 100,000 of those are waiting to be adopted. Maybe I could, step out and act and say yes today.
Christy Irwin, founder and executive director of Project Zero, helps families adopt foster children. She acknowledges many in the church have been working in this space for years, and that more is needed now than ever.
We need to all take a good internal look at ourselves and be willing just to put our yes on the table. That's really what it is putting our yes on the table, whatever that yes ends up being.
These leaders point out that taking a child into your home isn't the only way to help. Other options could look like providing meals to a foster family, helping with diaper drives, or a financial donation. Support comes in many forms and on all levels. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Caitlin, thank you so much. Gordon, this is an incredibly important call to the church.
It is, and it's time for the church to shine, to say yes. We want to be there. We want to be there for women. We want to help them. Children are our future. Any woman that wants to give birth, we want to help them. That is our goal. Let us all get together and say, how can we do this? Unfortunately, today, our pregnancy centers are spending money on security, which is absolutely strange to me that there would be some kind of war on pregnant women. Why would anyone want to do that? But that's the reality. So they need extra support, not just for security, but for the main mission. And let's keep the main mission in our sights. This is what we want to do. We want to help women have children. That's a wonderful culture to live in. That's a culture that has a future.